Good day, strategy gamers, and welcome to a new Let's Play series of Next War Poland. Specifically in this series, we are going to be playing in the advanced game rule set the tournament scenario called Suwalki Gap. Now, this tournament scenario was actually created by Griznok, a gentleman in the Next War community who gets design credits for the scenario and is based off of Mitchell Land's GMT published game Next War Poland. So this is a shorter scenario. It's meant to be played in tournaments and at events, and is really just a great representation to get you a sense of the advanced rule set of the Next War series, and also something that's very well balanced and covers a lot of the different mechanics that the game has to offer. I actually just got back from Historic Fest 2024 this past weekend, and I attended the Next War Con tournament that happened at that event and played 2 games of this, and it was just a delight. The tournament went very well. Participants had a great time playing the scenario. It's not the first time they have used this scenario. I believe that was the second year that they've used this scenario for the tournament. But really well balanced. There were a couple of draws that were decided by dice rolls. So it was just a great experience, and it's a shorter play time. I mean, ideally, if you really know the rules and you're kind of prepared for the scenario, the gameplay itself would probably take between 4 to 5 hours, I'd say. Of course, playing opposed might add just a little bit of time, but it's in that ballpark. So it's not something that takes the entire day to play, but it's also not a 1-hour scenario, just to be transparent before you dive into this. For that reason, we'll go through and have a number of half-hour videos covering the full scenario playthrough of this tournament setup. I don't know what the exact video count will be, but it shouldn't be too long of a series. Certainly it won't be as long as, say, the Downfall Let's Play that we have going on. And really excited to share with the community the Next War system. It's actually the first kind of series game that I picked up when I came into the wargaming hobby. It was Next War Taiwan was the first that really got me into this hobby, way back when that was first published, I believe in 2014. And I've always been a big supporter of the series. I have all the titles. It plays really well. It's a great representation of modern combined arms combat, and hoping that those newer to the series or those just looking for more content on it will find these videos interesting. Also, just to throw out there for those that are following the current Downfall Let's Play series I have, that is still coming along. I've actually already recorded today a video for that, so that will be publishing shortly after this video once it's gone through editing. So don't worry, that series is still alive and kicking, but we'll have this one running concurrently with it. I just came back from Historic Fest, which is put on in Kansas City by the History on the Table podcast folks, and just really wanted to get this to the table and share some of the experience that I've had with the scenario. And certainly while it was fresh in my mind, I wanted to try to reflect and give it another playthrough after seeing various strategies and tactics. So let's talk a little bit about the scenario itself. What you see in front of you is just a printout map that the designer did for the tournament play. However, you don't need this to play the scenario. If you have the Next War Poland game, you can download the scenario specific rules, which are available on the Next War series Discord. I believe it's also available off of the support files drive. But this is an accessible scenario if you're interested in it, and you don't need any additional components or maps or anything to play it. What you see in front of you in terms of the hex map is actually just a representation blown up from the Next War Poland map. So this is already in your game. You don't have to purchase a supplement or anything to play this scenario. To the right are just a number of tracks that would normally be found in, say, your strategic display and such with the game. So again, all of this is in your box of Next War Poland. Given that as well, I'm going to try to stick with the documents in terms of scenario rules, game-specific rules, series rules that came with the Next War Poland title. I know there are probably some updates. I know, for example, and I think it was Next War Iran saw an update maybe to the advanced strike table, for example. It's nothing that's going to break the game, and this way we just stay consistent, and everybody watching knows that this would be the same experience if you use the materials that come right out of the box of Next War Poland, just to make things a little simpler. But certainly if you want to use newer published rules or living rules after this video has been posted, this scenario should work just fine. It's very, very balanced, and is going to be a good representation of the series. In this particular scenario, you have the Russian and Belarusian forces representing the non-allied player, and then you have the Polish, NATO, and US forces representing the allied player. And as you can see on the map, this is a snippet of Poland in this section. The border with Belarus is here, Lithuania is here, and this does assume that already the Russian forces have made it through Lithuania. This is looking at the Russian forces coming south here on the map, and there are a number of victory points that are available for the Russian player to try to capture. The side with the most victory points at the end of the scenario is deemed the winner. I'll just highlight those for you real quickly. These two towns in the north, Oleko and Suwalki, are each worth 1 victory point, so combined a value of 2. You then have Augusto and Elk. These two cities are each worth 2 victory points, so together 4 plus these 2 is 6. In the south, you have Białystok and Zambrów, and those are each worth 3, bringing the total with these 2 to 6, plus up here is 12. And then there is a supply depot that the Allies must defend. If the Russians either capture or destroy, or just for any reason that's no longer on the map, it's an additional victory point. So the Allies start the scenario with 12 victory points in hand, and the Russians have the opportunity to capture those 12 victory points plus this supply depot victory point. The Allies don't get to count this supply depot as a victory point, so that's very important when you get to the scoring at the end of the scenario. There are additionally some ways to change those victory points at the beginning of the scenario. The first is that you can, with your opponent, do a bid for which side or which player will play which faction. So you bid 1, maybe 2 victory points to say, hey, I really want to be the Russians. I think they've got the advantage, etc. But then that costs you victory points when you get to the final scoring. The second is that the players can change the weather to severe winter weather, which represents that these rivers and these lakes, which are very critical on some of these hex sites, are frozen. Obviously, since I'm playing against myself and we want to keep the talking back and forth that I have in my head limited, we're not going to be bidding for victory points for which side we'll play. However, we will have the Russians spend a victory point to have the severe weather frozen landscape. So that means that right now the Allied player has 13 victory points. The Russian player has 0, non-Allied player has 0. And as the non-Allied player captures these cities, we will decrease the Allied victory point count and increase the non-Allied victory point value. And at the end of 3 turns, which is the length of this scenario, that's how we will determine the winner. The game does use the full complement of advanced series rules, so if you've played the standard rules or you would like to try the advanced system without necessarily committing to the larger footprint that normally comes with the advanced rules in these games, you'll be able to really experience that. You can see that you have the full air complement with these 2 ready, flown, and aborted displays for both sides. We will resolve advanced air combat here in the air superiority missions, as well as use these forces for strikes. We also use the special forces, and there are a couple of scenario-specific rules that I'll call out here real quickly. The first is that each side gets an additional special forces mission in the first raid, first special forces segment in the sequence of play. And additionally, the allies for the first segment of the strike phase get an additional Wild Weasel attack on the air defense track. There's some caveats with that. For example, no DRMs are added to those strikes, and it can't be shot down because it's just trying to represent out of theater degradation of the air defenses of both sides. Additionally, we play with the S-400s being live in this scenario, and first off, that means that the allied player can target the S-400s and actually try to destroy them via raids or strikes, but it also means that the allied player is facing Russian air defenses within Poland, whereas otherwise perhaps you would only have to worry about local anti-air. You now have to worry about more advanced SAM and AAA capabilities thanks to those S-400s. So those are in play. We also have a special rule in setup around stacking for the allied player. The allied player can only have 3 stacking points in any hex at startup, and the allied player must have at least 1 unit in each victory point location at the beginning of the setup. And as I say that, I actually think I need to make an adjustment here. So we're going to take this 5 or SOR RRC down to Zambro, because I think I actually need to have that set up there, not just the headquarters. I will check that off camera though. We'll leave the U.S. Airborne in Elk though. Continuing on though, another setup instruction is not every unit has a predefined hex that they must be placed upon. So for example, the non-allied player must place these units that you see displayed here within 1 hex of 4104. These units that you see over here must simply be placed within Lithuania. So these hexes are all representing Lithuania. And then we also have, for the Belarusian player, these units must all be either within 1 hex of 5015 or 4911. Looking at this again live, I think I'm missing a supply depot in the north, which I will get corrected at the next opportunity. You have a couple of off-map locations. So you have Hilo support off-map here for the Allies, here for the Belarusians. For the Belarusians, really, this does mean, because of the range and the 7 movement point cost, that this Hilo can really only project to Augusto and down this road to Bialystok, as you're counting from this side of the map hexes. There is an available airbase up here for the non-allied player. This is also where their supplies come in at a 2.5 movement point cost. So those are a few things on the operational map. To go back as well to the track on the right-hand side for current air superiority. So those familiar with the series will know that in past games and such, as you get more air superiority, your ability to recon and locate and strike against ground units increases the more air superiority that you have. However, in game-specific rules for Next War Poland, we actually ignore this, and it is assumed that both sides have detected ground units across the map. So that is less of a consideration for us in this particular scenario. We also have in the box for the USA a recovery box for their bombers. So they don't necessarily go down to flown, they go to recovery, and then they must roll to go back to a ready state. I know I'm just listing through a lot, but there are a few just to be aware of and want to make sure folks have the background. Another rule is that in this scenario, while both sides have ballistic missiles, gun missiles, and cruise missiles, there is a limit of using 2 per game turn for each side. And there are not replacements coming in for, say, cruise missiles. So what this means is when you're looking at that US player or the Allied player, really we have 4 cruise missiles to spend across 3 turns, and we can't use more than 2 in one game turn. So likely the first 2 game turns we will spend 2 and not have any left in game turn 3. So there are a number of restrictions that really present you with dilemmas and interesting situations to overcome. As I said earlier on, when we played this at the Next War Con at Historic Fest, games were really well balanced. I mean, no one had a game where one side was blowing away the other. The players were all pretty familiar with the game and the system, and I think that helped, but it was a testament to the balance of the scenario that multiple came down to draws and the others were still very close, even in game turn 3. So if you're looking for a good experience, I can't recommend this scenario enough. We will dive just a little bit into the sequence of play tonight, but we will take more videos to really get into this later on. I think I've covered everything in the scenario specific rules that I wanted to cover, and just going to hop over real quick and we'll dive into the sequence of play for everybody. Before jumping into sequence of play, actually, I did want to speak briefly to kind of some tactics and strategies, both what I'll be trying to employ here in these videos, but also some of what I've seen in past playthroughs. So first, from the Allied player, you really do have to accept the fact that the majority of these cities, especially in the north, you will very likely use. They are not in great defensible positions, and the number of Russian forces that are coming here from the top of the map is quite considerable, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to stop them from getting Suwalki, Alecko, Elk, and Augusto. I think in every playthrough that I've had of this scenario and that I've witnessed, all 4 of those cities have fallen to the non-Allied player. And it frankly wasn't close, I think, in most of the scenarios that happened. Now, I've seen games, though, where it takes until game turn 3 for the non-Allied player to maybe get Augusto, Elk, or both. But they do eventually pretty consistently capture those cities. So that's a bit of a foregone conclusion. And that really then means as the Allies, you need to find a balance between slowing the non-Allied player down and not finding yourself in a position that they do break through and it's roaming free country here in this terrain in the middle of the map, where you find yourself most vulnerable come game turn 2 and 3, and you really need to be careful about that. When we think about the threat coming from the Belarusians on the side and Bialystok, while this looks like this might be the area of greatest concern, it's important to remember a few things. First, this is urban terrain, which has a number of defensive bonuses that you will not find in these cities in the north here. Additionally, these units, especially this U.S. Airborne being a 7, is quite impactful when it comes to the efficiency rating. And you compare that to the Belarusian forces, which are at efficiency ratings of 5, compared to the Russians that are at 6. The Belarusians, it looks like numerically they have a great advantage, but really it's only 4 ground fighting formations that they have. So it's only 2 to 1 in terms of even just quantity of forces. And second, they are lower in quality, and as the attacker into an urban environment is just very difficult for them. I have yet to see Bialystok fall without Belarusian plus Russian forces supporting the fall of it. Generally, the Allies are able to keep Zambrau and Bialystok, but it requires effort, right? That's not a given that it's going to happen in this scenario, but they are very easy to, they're easier, I should say, to defend given the reinforcements you get in game turn 1 and 2, and just given the nature of the urban environment in Białystok. I'm also probably going to be pronouncing most of these local names in Poland incorrectly, so my apologies to any viewers that may find that I'm wildly off the mark. If you have feedback in the comments, though, of how I could perhaps better pronounce any of these, I am always very, very open to trying to learn and improve on that. When you consider the Russian player, the non-allied player, it's really a race against the clock. I mean, you are hard pressed to try to get to 7 is kind of the magic number generally that you have to get to as the non-allied player to win. So 7 means that you've captured Augusto, Elk, Alecko, Suwałki, and you've destroyed or captured or knocked off the map this supply depot down here. That's the most common way that I've seen the non-allied player win, was just by that dominance, not necessarily by taking Białystok or Zambrów. The problem with that is that if you look at the size of this operational map, that means that the Russian forces find themselves extended all the way from the top of the map down here. And while they do get reinforcements, it's pretty much 1-to-1 in ratio to the allied player. And they have to make sure that their supply trains both remain covered, that they are committing enough forces to the clearing operations of Augusto, Elk, Alecko, and Suwałki. And for those unfamiliar with the series, when capturing a city or urban environment, there's actually a mechanic where you have to simulate your forces clearing that city to make sure that there are not, insurgent, guerrilla, leftover local resistance that would impact your supply lines in the future. So you have to keep forces committed in these locations even after you've pushed the enemy out to make sure that you clear them appropriately. With all that being said, by the time the Russian forces really do get south of Augusto and Elk, they find themselves in a position where it's almost 1-to-1 in the fighting, and they lose their numerical superiority that they had at the beginning of the match. And the allied player also has the capability to use air mobile points to do operations behind the enemy lines in game turn 3. And Suwałki, Alecko, Elk, and Augusto have to have some type of force in them to make sure that the allied player actually can't come in and take control of that city right at the end of the game. So those are the pressures that both sides face. I really can't say that it favors one side or the other. Let us now turn to the sequence of play. For those not familiar with the game system or Next War Poland or other Next War titles, it is a very procedural system. It's something that I enjoy. I understand it may not be for everybody, but it is very well documented in what you do, in which order, with great detail, great references to the rules in the sequence of play. So really, if you're trying to learn the system, I encourage you to really let the sequence of play be your guide and learn the mechanics as you go through the sequence of play itself. That is not a bad way to go, of just reading what do you do next, referencing those rules and those mechanics, and then proceeding to the next step. So we will be walking through in this video series very closely through the steps in the advanced sequence of play, and it's a great opportunity to divvy up these videos into appropriate segments. So we're going to begin this video at the very top of the list. The weather phase for this scenario is already predetermined. As I mentioned, we did choose severe winter with frozen status on the ground, and the weather is considered clear for things such as strikes and air combat, air flight, etc. The initiative phase is not relevant for us on game turn 1 or the rest of the scenario. The non-allied player has the initiative in game turns 1 and 2, and game turn 3 is contested, with the non-allied player being considered the first player in that situation. That brings us now to the third phase, which is electronic detection. So in this section, really what we're trying to do is assets that are in theater, we are trying to detect them to gain a better understanding of their position, composition, etc., So that way we may be able to better conduct a strike against them, a raid, artillery barrage, whatever the situation might be. But we roll for detection to try to make sure that those assets are identified properly and we can attack them. So with that, it says to go through alternating each side. Here, I'm just going to do all the non-allied and then I'll do the allied. And in this scenario, each side has 3 electronic detection attempts. To see the result of those electronic detection attempts, we will be using a D10. And you see in the top right, on the back of the advanced tables display, the electronic detection table. For the non-allied side, they need a 2 or less result to detect. And you can see below that some DRMs. And because these are Russian detection attempts, that actually means that we need a die roll of 3 or less to be successful. Zeros count as a 0. They do not count as a 10 in this series. So we will go ahead and identify which targets we want to detect, and then we will roll the die for those results. As the non-allied player, I think the priority asset to try to detect right away is generally this Polish HQ, which will often be positioned supporting the Polish units in these cities. HQs are able to enhance the combat strength of similar supporting nations' strengths in combat. So for example, when the Russians come to attack Aleppo, this HQ would be able to support that combat with a combat value of 5, which would take the defense strength from a 3 to an 8. So that is very significant. So one of our priorities as the non-allied is going to be to try to disrupt this HQ specifically. And secondarily to that, I think we are going to try to detect the HQ down here in Zambro. So those will be our 2 detection attempts, but we're first going to try for the Polish HQ, and we will keep rolling on that until successful. So die roll number 1. We got a 1, so we have detected the HQ in Gorjawo. I again don't believe I'm pronouncing that anywhere close to correct. We'll now try for the HQ here in Zambro. That's a 6, so that's unsuccessful, and we will try one more time. A 5 is also unsuccessful. So now we will flip over to the allied players' detection attempts. For the allies, it's kind of a similar strategy where the Russian HQs are really force multipliers in their advance. So we are going to try to detect some Russian HQs. As the allied player, I'd like to try to disrupt the center or vanguard of the forces coming from the north here, the top of the map. So we're going to start by targeting this 4th Guard tank, 1st Guard tank HQ. And for the allies, you will see that we need to roll a 4 or less. So our odds are slightly better with these rolls. So first roll, a 4. So we have detected that HQ. It's a good start. And now we will also try to detect the 3rd HQ right here. 7, no go. We'll try one more time. A 2, so it is detected. And that completes our electronic detection phase in the sequence of play. Next up in the sequence of play is the first Special Operation Forces phase. And this is for initiative turn only. And this will be only for the initiative player. So in this case, the non-allies, they allocate and resolve Special Forces missions on the map. Now, the scenario rules also call for a free Special Forces attempt per side that does not need to roll for survival. So we are going to allocate that mission and I'm just going to add an extra marker here, as a raid against the detection on the ADF or air defense track. And to be clear, the rules do specify that this mission is to be conducted on the air defense track, so it has to be allocated there. We're also going to use our other Russian SOF forces against the SAM as a raid. So we are trying to decrease the SAM level and detection level of the allied player with our special forces during this phase, and that's trying to again degrade the allies' ability to detect incoming strikes and respond to enemy aircraft with surface-to-air missiles. The next Special Forces mission, which we have, which is a Belarusian Special Forces, is going to be against the Polish HQ here in this town. And in that mission, it's going to be a targeting mission. Now, targeting missions with Special Forces, if successful, increase the outcome or the probability of a positive outcome when conducting a strike. You can think of it as, further reconnaissance or lighting up a target with some additional means by Special Forces on the ground before an air strike against that target. So they will do targeting, and then the Russian Special Forces and the free one that we get this turn will go against detection and SAM. To resolve those, we will look at the advanced game tables, and we will first resolve the targeting that the Belarusians are doing there in the town against the Polish HQ. So when we look at the various, actually we don't have any DRMs because it's not a raid, so it's just a flat roll where we need to get a 4 or less on the die. So we will go ahead and try to accomplish that. A 3. So it was successful. So we are going to put a targeting -1 marker on that HQ. So that means when we go to conduct a strike against it, likely in the air phase, that we will be, in the strike phase, with air assets, we will get a -1 DRM to that. Next, we have to see if those Belarusian Special Forces survived that mission. So looking at this, we have this survival table, and we are going to have, let's see, I think just a -1 DRM on whether or not they survive. So we'll go ahead and roll that. A 2, so they survive quite easily, and they now go back to the non-allied Special Forces used box. We will now conduct our raid against the enemy SAM here on the air defense track. And for this, we see that there is a raid DRM versus SAM or theater weapon of +1. So we have to add 1 to our roll. Other than that, there are no other modifiers here. And against detection, SAMs, and theater weapons, we use this middle column here on the table for our results. So that is a 4 or less as being successful, but we have the +1, so really it means we need to roll a 3 or lower. So let's see if we're successful against the SAM. We are not successful, and now we must roll to see if they survive, and there will be a, I believe, -2 DRM to that. 3, they did survive. Now we get our freebie, which is against the detection. It's going to be the same roll, but this time there's no DRM. So we just need a 4 or less to try to reduce the ally detection rate. A 4. All right. So that means that the ally detection value is now at a 5. And then this SOF, we're just going to set off to the side. It doesn't need a survival roll. I have not been tracking it properly, but we will use the phase track up here to represent that we're on the first SOF sequence of play, and we are now moving into the air-naval phase. Air-naval phase will take a little bit, so I think we're probably going to call the episode here. So thank you for joining me for this new playthrough of the Next War Poland Suwalki Gap tournament scenario. Really looking forward to further content on this particular both series and scenario, as I find it quite interesting. Any questions or comments, please leave them down below in the video. and hoping that this is of interest to those who have either been fans of the series, who may be new to looking into it, or just those who in general are curious about these types of hypotheticals and smaller format combined arms scenarios. So thank you all so much, and as always, strategy gamers, hoping you have yourselves an excellent day. Bye now.